Before cell phones and fiber optics, our long-distance calls bounced across the country on a backbone of microwave relay towers. Massive steel spires on remote peaks, their dishes aimed at each other across empty miles. Most of that network is dead now, decommissioned and rusting. But a few of the old towers still have power, and according to the people who've climbed them, some signals never stop transmitting. The AT&T Long Lines Network, the military microwave backbone. The Cold War early warning sites, they were built in places nobody wanted to go. Bare mountain peaks, isolated ridgelines, stretches of desert where the only road was a rutted dirt track. Technicians lived in bunkers at the base of the towers, monitoring signals, changing vacuum tubes, filing reports nobody ever read. When the network was decommissioned, they just walked away, left the equipment humming, left the dishes aimed at the horizon, and in a few places, the equipment is still humming. Tonight, 3 people who climbed these old towers share the moments they realized the signals weren't just noise. A salvage contractor who found a bunker on a California peak where the vacuum tubes were still glowing. A security guard in Maine who picked up a distress call from an aircraft that disappeared 40 years ago. And a surveyor in Vermont who found a Teletype machine printing coordinates that pointed directly back at her. Right. Let's start climbing. Marianela Rojas had been a tower climber for 6 years, but she'd never worked a decommissioning job like this. The Mount Baldy microwave relay was part of the old AT&T Long Lines network. Built in 1954 and shut down in 1986 when fiber optics made the horn antennas obsolete. Her company had won the contract to strip the site, pull the copper, scrap the steel, leave nothing but a concrete pad. She parked her truck at the end of a washed-out access road and hiked the last half-mile to the summit. The tower was a classic 4-legged steel lattice, 200 feet tall, horn antennas still aimed east and west like blind eyes. The concrete blockhouse at the base was supposed to be empty. The blueprints said all equipment had been removed in the 80s, but when Marianela pushed open the heavy steel door, she found the equipment still there. Racks of old vacuum tube amplifiers, a dusty teletype machine, a panel of meters and dials, all of it covered in a fine gray dust, and all of it powered on. She stood in the doorway, her headlamp beam sweeping across the glowing orange filaments of the vacuum tubes. That was the first impossibility. There was no power to this site. The generator had been removed decades ago. The main power line had been cut at the base of the mountain, but the tubes were glowing, the meters were twitching. And from a speaker mounted on the wall, a faint voice was speaking. Marianela stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass. The voice was coming from a speaker connected to an old radio receiver. It was a man's voice, tinny and distant, speaking in a calm, measured tone. Traffic clear on Corridor 7. Standing by for relay handoff. Anything on your end, Baldy? She stared at the radio. It was a transmitter as well as a receiver. The microphone was still in its bracket, a thick, heavy thing from the 1950s. She didn't touch it. She pulled out her phone to record the scene, but her phone was dead, not low, battery dead, the screen black, unresponsive. Then a second voice came through the speaker. This one was different, deep, slow, with an odd resonance, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. And we are not the relay. We have always been here. We use the signal when the network is quiet. Your voice is new. Identify. Marianela's mouth went dry. She reached for the microphone, hesitated, then keyed it. This is a contractor at Mount Baldy site. Who is this? Or there was a long pause. The vacuum tubes flickered. The meters on the panel swung hard right. pegged against their stops. Then the deep voice returned. "We are the listeners. We have been on this frequency since the towers were built. You are the first to speak back in 38 years. Stay on the line. We want to learn your pattern." The speaker went silent. Svarianella stood frozen, the microphone heavy in her hand. A sound from outside. The tower. The massive steel structure was groaning. Not the groan of wind, a rhythmic, mechanical sound, like something heavy was climbing the lattice. She ran to the door and looked up. The tower was empty. Just the rusted steel and the horn antennas silhouetted against the gray sky. But at the very top, the aircraft warning light was no longer blinking red. It was solid green, a color that was never installed on any long lines tower. Marianella didn't wait to figure it out. She threw the microphone back in its bracket, ran out of the bunker, and didn't stop until she reached her truck. She drove down the mountain with her heart hammering, the tower shrinking in her rearview mirror. The green light was still glowing. She reported the site as hazardous and unsafe structure and recommended immediate demolition. She never told her company about the voices, but she researched the Mount Baldy relay later. In 1962, a technician named Arnold Hewitt disappeared from the site during a routine maintenance shift. His body was never found. The official report said he probably got lost hiking down the mountain, but Marianella knows what happened to him. She knows he answered a voice on the radio. And she knows that somewhere on that frequency, the listeners are still waiting for someone else to speak back. Keenan Lockhart had been the night security guard at the Jackman relay station for 2 years, and he'd never heard a voice on the emergency frequency that wasn't a scheduled test or a weather alert. The station was a semi-automated radio relay for the FAA, bouncing air traffic control signals between Boston and Montreal. Keenan's job was simple: walk the fence line, check the generator, and monitor the backup radio rack in case the primary system failed. The rack was a bank of old analog receivers, relics from the 1970s, kept online as a redundancy that nobody really believed they'd ever need. On a foggy October night, with the temperature hovering just above freezing, Keenan was in the equipment room logging the generator hours when one of the old receivers crackled to life. At first he thought it was just static, but then he heard the words. "Mayday, Mayday, this is November 473 Delta Papa. I've lost my bearings. Visibility 0. I need a vector to the nearest airfield. Does anyone copy?" Keenan grabbed the logbook and checked the frequency. 121.5 megahertz, the international air distress frequency, but there was no Mayday call scheduled, no training exercise. He keyed his own mic. "November 473 Delta Papa. This is Jackman Relay. I read you. State your position." Over the voice came back, crackling with static, but clear enough. "Jackman, thank God. I'm somewhere over western Maine. My instruments are dead. I've been flying blind for 20 minutes. Can you give me a heading?" Keenan pulled out the old radar display, a green phosphor screen that hadn't been used in a decade. He powered it on. The screen flickered to life, and after a moment, a single blip appeared. It was moving. Slowly, erratically. He gave the pilot a heading toward the nearest regional airport and radioed the FAA to report the situation. The FAA controller's voice was confused. "Jackman, we're not showing any aircraft in your sector. No flight plans filed, no primary radar returns. Are you sure you're picking up a live transmission?" Keenan looked at the radar screen. The blip was still there. The voice came through again. "Jackman, I see lights below me. A town. I'm going to try to set down. Thank you for your help." The transmission cut out. The radar blip vanished. Keenan sat in the silence, his heart pounding. Then the receiver crackled once more, a new voice, calm, measured. Not a pilot in distress. Jackman relay. This is November 473, Delta Papa. We have landed safely. Thank you for your assistance. We'll remain on this frequency. Keenan stared at the speaker. Something about the voice was wrong. Too calm, too steady, and the call sign. The aircraft had given its tail number as N473DP. He pulled out the old incident logs, curious. Buried in a binder from 1984, he found it. November 12th, 1984. A Cessna 172 with tail number N473DP disappeared over western Maine during a snowstorm. The pilot, a man named Gerald Prue, had radioed a mayday. The FAA had lost contact. The aircraft was never found. Keenan looked up. The receiver was still active. The voice came through one more time. Jackman relay, we are still on frequency. We appreciate the heading. We'll wait for further instructions. Keenan reached for the power switch on the receiver rack. Before he could touch it, a knock sounded at the window of the equipment room. He turned. Outside, in the fog, a figure stood, man-shaped, dressed in a flight jacket, a headset still around its neck. His face was pale, its eyes dark hollows. It raised one hand and tapped the glass again. Its mouth moved, and through the speaker on the receiver rack, the voice said, "We see you in there. Can you open the door? We've been out here so long." Keenan didn't open the door. He backed away, grabbed his coat, and walked out the opposite side of the building to his truck. He drove straight to the nearest town and called his supervisor from a payphone. He quit that night. The Jackman relay station was decommissioned 3 years later. Nobody ever asked about the old incident logs. But Keenan knows what he heard. He knows that somewhere in the fog over western Maine, Gerald Prue and his Cessna are still flying, still calling Mayday, still landing in a town that was never there, and still waiting for someone to open the door. Iris Tremblay was a site surveyor for a cell tower company, and her job was to evaluate decommissioned mountaintop sites for possible repurposing. Black Cat Mountain was a Grail site, an old Air Force early warning radar installation, built in 1959 to watch for Soviet bombers. Abandoned in 1971 when satellites made it obsolete, the tower and Rado were still standing, skeletal and cracked, and the operations building at the base of the tower was supposed to be gutted. Iris drove up the old military access road in her company Jeep, the trees closing in around her, and parked at the summit. The operations building was a squat concrete block house with narrow slit windows and a heavy steel door that someone had already pried open. She stepped inside, her flashlight illuminating a single large room filled with rusted consoles, broken CRT screens, and a thick layer of dust. In the center of the room, against the far wall, was a teletype machine. It was an old Model 28, the kind that printed messages on rolls of yellow paper. It was covered in dust. It was plugged into nothing. And it was printing. Iris stopped in the doorway. Teletype chattered away, the keys hammering the paper with mechanical precision. She walked closer. The paper roll was fresh, not yellowed, not brittle. The message it was printing was a series of coordinates, latitude and longitude. Over and over, she recognized the format military grid references. She pulled out her GPS unit and plugged in the coordinates. The screen displayed a location, Black Cat Mountain, the very summit she was standing on. The teletype chattered again. A new message. Contact detected. Source, interior. Signal, origin, structural. Advise. Iris stared at the machine. There was no power, no data feed, no way for this machine to be receiving anything. She reached for her radio to call her supervisor, but the radio was screaming static on every frequency. And then the teletype printed another line. Visual confirmation requested. Operator to radome. She looked out the slit window at the cracked radome on the hill above the building. The spherical structure was dark, its panels caved in, the radar dish inside exposed to the elements. And yet, from the cracks in the panels, she could see a faint green glow, pulsing, like a heartbeat. She should have left. Every instinct told her to, but she was a surveyor. She needed to document everything. She walked up the hill to the radome. The door at its base was open, hanging from a single rusted hinge. The green glow was brighter now, spilling out onto the dead grass. She stepped inside. The radar dish was still there, a massive skeletal parabola aimed at the sky. But it was no longer rusted. The metal was clean, gleaming, and it was moving. Slowly, scanning. And at the base of the dish, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, was a figure. A man. He was wearing an old Air Force uniform, the blue faded to gray, the insignia tarnished. His face was upturned toward the dish, his eyes closed, his mouth moving in a silent recitation. The teletype in the building below chattered on, and through the open door, Iris could hear the words being printed. Operator present. Maintaining watch. Contact sustained. The man's eyes opened. They were solid black, no whites, no pupils. He looked at Iris and smiled. When he spoke, his voice was the same mechanical chatter as the teletype. We have been watching the skies since 1959. The bombers never came, but something else did. We track it. We'll always track it. Would you like to see? He raised one hand and pointed at the radar dish. The green glow intensified, and for a moment Iris saw something in the air above the disho shape, vast and wrong, flickering in the beam. She didn't stay to see it clearly. She ran down the hill, past the operations building, into the Jeep. She drove down the mountain so fast the undercarriage scraped on the rocks. Behind her, the green glow pulsed from the cracked radome, and over the roar of the engine, she could hear the teletype still printing. Iris never went back to Black Cap Mountain. She told her company the site was structurally unsound and recommended against acquisition. She never told them about the man in the uniform or the thing in the radar beam. But she researched the site later. 1971, the Black Cap Mountain Early Warning Station was decommissioned. The last watch officer, Captain Thomas Halstead, refused to leave. He claimed the radar had detected something that wasn't an aircraft, something that was still out there, and he would not abandon his post. The Air Force sent a psychiatric team. By the time they arrived, Captain Halstead was gone. The door to the radome was found open, the radar dish still spinning. The teletype still printing the same message over and over, contact maintained, awaiting relief. They searched the mountain. They never found him. Iris knows where he went. She knows he never left his post. And she knows that on quiet nights, if you climb Black Cap Mountain with a radio tuned to the old military frequencies, you can still hear the teletype printing, and a voice Captain Halstead's voice still reporting the contact that he sees in the sky. 3 towers, 3 signals. and 3 encounters with the voices that ride the airwaves long after the power is cut. Marianela Rojas found a bunker where vacuum tubes were still glowing and something on the radio was learning her pattern. Keenan Lockhart answered a mayday call from an aircraft that vanished 40 years ago and found the pilot still waiting outside the window. Iris Tremblay discovered a teletype still printing coordinates and a watch officer still tracking something in the sky that was never supposed to be there. The old microwave network is still out there. Thousands of towers on empty peaks, their dishes rusted, their bunkers sealed, but the frequencies are still active. And if you find yourself alone on a mountaintop with a radio and you hear a voice asking for a relay handoff, you might want to stay off the mic. This has been True Terror Files Official. If you've ever worked in remote communications or picked up a signal you couldn't explain, drop your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring that bell. The next time you see a red light blinking on a distant ridge, remember, something might still be watching the skies, and it might still be waiting for an answer.